Good morning. I will call the meeting to order. This is the Legislative Committee. And first we will go to our consultants and get their reports. So the first item is from Jay Ramey at Mark Kadish and Associates firm. So, Dave Ramey, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am, Madam Chair.
Good morning. And will you give us an update on whatever is happening that isn't in your written report? You can give us an update on any new information coming out of Washington.
Yes, just absolutely. Briefly, our report mainly focused on budget appropriations and the debt ceiling, and the updates to there are that the House cannot pass a budget resolution primarily due to the interests of the Progressive Caucus wanting to see more money in domestic spending. So now there are bicameral, to say House Senate negotiations going on to try to reach a new budget caps. If we don't reach new budget caps at the end of this fiscal year, September 30th, sequestration will kick in, which would result in cuts of $71 billion in defense and $55 billion in domestic spending, which includes the EPA. So everyone believes we'll avoid that, but right now there's negotiations going on between the House and the Senate to come up with a new budget cap number. And of course, we need that budget cap number to pursue appropriations. The appropriations process will start even if they don't reach the number, hoping that the budget number will catch up to them later. And of course, it's in that appropriations process that your requests on things like 103, 105, targeted airshed grants, and DERA will be achieved. And that's our update.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dave. Next, we'll go to the Carmen Group, and I believe Gary Hoitzma is on the phone for the Carmen Group. Good morning, Gary.
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair. This is Gary. Two quick updates from my written report. First, on infrastructure, the news that President Trump has agreed to meet with Speaker Pelosi and Democratic leader Schumer specifically on the subject of infrastructure sometime in the next few weeks. So that will be interesting. If any movement is to happen on that issue this year, it likely will stem from that meeting, so we'll be watching that closely. Secondly, quickly, the news yesterday that EPA sources are reporting that the CAFE standard fuel economy rule is likely to be out by mid-June. And Administrator Wheeler's comments at congressional hearings this week and in an interview that he thinks the rule will have significant changes from the proposed rule, that they're incorporating a lot of the comments that have come in over time on the rules. So we'll be looking for that. So that's my quick update. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Hoitzma on the update?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Mark on the line? Thank you. So the infrastructure bill, can you just dive into that a little bit more on how it will benefit our district and the politics behind, this wall and where the administration is negotiating the building of the wall, how it impacts the long-term infrastructure bill?
Gary, did you hear the question?
Well,
yeah.
There is no infrastructure bill yet. It's a work in progress in the Congress. We're waiting to see what it comes. I don't think the building the wall part is going to affect the overall infrastructure bill. I think there are two separate issues there. I think the politics surrounding infrastructure right now has to do with the budget and specifically where the money is going to come from to pay for it. The Speaker and others are talking about a $1 to $2 trillion infrastructure package that they would like to see No one so far has come out with a specific pay for that. There's some discussion of the gasoline tax being increased, but that's a very difficult thing to see happening before the next election. So it's a very difficult political process they're going to go through. So that would be my quick read on it right now.
This is Amelia from Cassidy. Can I echo part of what Gary said and add a little more from the House Democratic perspective?
Yes, go ahead, Amelia.
Sure. So Gary is 100% on target with the real question about the viability of an infrastructure bill is whether there's funding for it and whether that funding comes from the gas tax. And the House Ways and Means Committee will be looking at that in the upcoming weeks. I think from a South Coast Air Quality Management District perspective, if there is a moving infrastructure bill, a lot of focus will be on electrification and also looking at heavy-duty trucks and how they are taxed and whether cleaner trucks could be taxed differently. And so we're sort of pressure testing some ideas with staff about that now, but it's very, very, very early in the process.
I appreciate that response. Thank you.
So when this bill first came up, or this idea first came up for infrastructure, it was very heavily leveraged with matching funds from local jurisdictions. Do you think that's still going to be the case? Anybody?
Was that a question for me?
Yeah, well, it's for you, Amelia, or for Gary. We met right after the administration came in. We met with administration officials on the infrastructure bill.
And Dave.
And Dave Ramey. Oh, Dave was also involved with that, sure. And the idea then was, yes, it was a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, but a bunch of that money came from matching funds from local jurisdictions who were going to states and local jurisdictions. And I wondered if that's still the concept, or are they looking in a different direction, or do we even know?
No, I think the problem has been that they don't want to go with that plan from last year, which include a lot of private sector money, public-private partnerships, and local input. The political weight is moving towards more federal money being put into it, and I think that's going to be a big topic of discussion with the president and the congressional leaders to find out where the federal money is going to come from to do this in a good way. So that's where it's headed now. I think the proposal from last year is pretty much off the table, and they're starting from scratch with a new proposal, hopefully worked out between the Congress and the president.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Are there any other questions from committee members on the report from Gary Heitzman? Seeing none, we'll move on to Amelia Jenkins from Cassidy and Associates. Amelia, do you have anything more to add to your report?
No, I think in the interest of time, I will just say that we don't have any updates right now, and if we do, we'll follow up with staff. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Amelia. We'll move on to our consultants from the state. And first we have Paul Gonzalez. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. Just briefly, I wanted to let everybody know yesterday was the official start of the legislative spring recess. But the legislature is out and will be in their districts and will return on Monday, April 22nd. That being said, there are a few upcoming legislative deadlines that are fast approaching that I wanted to bring to the attention of the committee. As I mentioned, they return on April 22nd. April 26th is the deadline for fiscal bills to be passed out of policy committees into the appropriations committee. So it leaves a very short window the week we return to get bills, at least appropriation bills, out of committee and into appropriations. And then the following Friday, May 3rd, is the deadline to pass all non-fiscal bills out of policy committee into the floor. So needless to say, things will be moving pretty quickly once they return from spring recess, and we'll continue to keep the committee apprised as things progress. And with that, I hope everybody has a great spring recess and a happy Easter, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions for Paul? Seeing none, we'll move on to Quintana Watson Hartman. Katie Maple is on the line this morning. Good morning, Katie.
Good morning, Chair and members. Thank you. Thank you for providing the updates, Paul, on the timeline. Just a quick update on Senate Bill 1. As I noted in my report, it had passed through the Senate Environmental Quality Committee on a 5-2 vote. Since then, it has also passed through the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee on a 7-2 vote, and next it will be heard in the Senate Judiciary Committee. It does not have a hearing date set yet. We are starting conversations with the author's office on just some questions. We had a conference call set up for yesterday with the staff, but that had to be rescheduled due to a scheduling conflict with the staff. So we will be rescheduling that. And additionally, for Assembly Bill 210, VOPEL, that was supposed to be heard in in Transportation Committee on the 25th of March. The author has pulled that bill due to opposition. And has decided to make it a 2-year bill. Other than that, no other updates, so happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Katie? Okay, we'll move on to California Advisors. Ross Buckley is with us this morning with an update on his report. Good morning, Ross.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you. Just wanted to update the committee that the budget process is in full swing in Sacramento. Many subcommittee meetings have been happening over the last couple of months to start talking about different portions of the budget. Currently, kind of attention is being drawn to the governor's May revise, which will happen sometime in early to middle May, where he will update revenue forecasts and kind of his priorities ahead of the June 15th budget deadline. Once the May revise happens, the budget committee meetings will start happening again to kind of make the final adjustments as we move to that June deadline. And that's my update for my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Ross? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to agenda item number 3. This is an update on our legislation for voting district authorization for clean air, and we have Philip with the report. Good morning,
Yes.
Philip.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. SB 732 by Senator Allen was amended from its spot bill form into more substantive content on March 27th. Consequently, the bill was referred to the Senate Governance and Finance Committee and was set for an April 24th hearing. However, as we have continued to communicate with electeds and a wide spectrum of interested stakeholders regarding this effort, we have continued to receive negative feedback, particularly from local governments and transportation agencies regarding concerns about diverting sales tax revenue from other interests. As a result, staff believes it is best to put a pause on the bill and focus more on collaboration and education with stakeholders to try to educate on the air quality problem and the dire need for funding, weigh pros and cons, and build more consensus on how this problem can be addressed. Staff has asked Senator Allen to pull the bill from committee, and we are currently awaiting confirmation regarding this course of action. And that's my report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions on this agenda item? Supervisor Rutherford.
No questions on that, but at the board meeting on Friday, I had talked about some language I'd like to see us try to get in the bill, and so I'd still like to have that conversation in case the bill doesn't get pulled or when it is attempted again, that we are able to get it included. Wayne asked that I find some language, and Andy Silva with my staff will be there. Oh, there, he was hiding behind you, Judith. He's got some examples we found in 2 bills, and this was in connection with the creation of the Bay Area Tolling Authority, SB 595, and then a follow-up bill, AB 1041, that required that if voters approve a toll increase, the authority shall establish an independent oversight committee within 6 months. The oversight committee shall include 2 representatives from each county within the jurisdiction. Explains a little bit about how that'll work. Then in the follow-up bill, they added 1 bit of language that I would think we would want to include too, which says a representative appointed to the oversight committee shall not be a member, former member, staff, or former staff of the commission or the authority. I would add, or any board member. shall not be employed by any organization or person that has received or is receiving funding from the commission or authority, shall not be a former employee of any person who's contracted with the organization, etc. So when we move forward at some point, I would like to see this kind of language included in the authorizing legislation for anything that we do.
Thank you, Janice. And
I assume that would take a vote of the committee and the board.
correct. And of course, this isn't on our agenda this morning, so I would refer it to our staff to take a look at this language and come back to the committee at appropriate time to suggest what you, to give us your suggestions on this approach.
Sure.
Go ahead,
And I'll be happy to do it again, but let me, if I may, Madam Chair, let me express my disappointment then, given that at our board meeting, the chair directed that this be done at committee. Y'all knew I would be bringing the language, and yet you're saying the agenda does not allow for this language to be included. It's frustrating.
Well, it's not specifically on our agenda, and neither do I think there's any rush here at this time. I think there's time for language to be considered. I mean, you presented language, but that isn't language developed by our staff, and so I would ask our staff to take a look at this and
Okay, I'm just, if I could just again, I understand what you're saying, Madam Chair. At the board meeting on Friday, when I raised this to the full board, Chairman Burke said he'd like it considered by the committee. Wayne then asked me to bring language. Now, why I'm doing the staff work of getting the language is a little beyond me, but I did it. Here's the language. It wasn't put on the agenda to be considered, even though we had direction from the board chair to consider it at this meeting. So I'm simply expressing my frustration. I'll expect to see this on a future agenda. I'm delighted, of course, that the bill is being delayed. But if and when it does move forward, it should include these taxpayer protections.
You should be doing a happy dance.
Oh, I am. I'm thrilled. But I also know this isn't the last time we'll see this. It'll be back.
Why are you over there raising Cain when you won? You know you got to be gracious of victory.
I also know that things rise again, and this will rise again. It's not the last time that we will see it. So when it rises again, let's get this in there.
I have no objection with getting it in there. I don't want any confusion about that. I have no objection about getting it in there. But I do want, obviously, legal counsel to take a look at it to see if it's appropriate. And I'm like you. I don't know why you were bringing language to an organization that has as many legal people as we do. But I apologize for that.
thank you, Supervisor Rutherford and Chair Burke. And so we will expect to
Madam Chair?
staff take a look at this. Yes, Supervisor Perez? Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I think the points though that were made by Supervisor Rutherford are well taken. The fact that she did mention them last go around at our board meeting. I think ultimately at the end of the day, obviously we have the time now to work it in. It would make the bill stronger. You know, the accountability measures in my experience up in Sacramento do allow for these bills to move along a little easier, if you will, without as much opposition. So anytime that we have a task force of accountability, if you will, with any type of measure like this, especially a tax, I think ultimately is a good thing because we're accountable, folks are accountable, and it's targeted and restricted funding on that front. On the other front, I want to commend staff, quite frankly, for doing their due diligence and getting to this point of recognizing that there's opposition and perhaps it's time to take a step back. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's okay to have an educational and informational campaign over the course of this next year, per se, over the summer. You know, these type of measures usually do not get passed in 1 year. And you're very lucky if you get it passed in 2 years. And so, you know, I wouldn't look at this as a bad thing. I would just look at this as an opportunity for us to take a step back, take another look, put some more language in there, work with others, walk the halls, continue to educate, build a coalition, so on and so forth. It may take 2 years, it may take 3 years. It is what it is. The thing though is that just making sure that timing needs to be right on, and we need to make sure we have the language that we want in the bill, and build that coalition. So I commend staff for realizing that and not trying to push this through, jam it through, at the risk of losing this legislation or this bill. So, just want to make sure I made that statement out loud for you all. It may take 2 years, it may take 3 years. It is what it is.
Thank you, Supervisor, and thank you for your insight from your experience in the legislature. So, are there any other questions or comments at this time from committee members? Thank you. We'll expect then our staff to take a look at this language and come back to this committee with recommendations, perhaps at our next meeting. All right. Then we will move on to action items that we have on this morning. We have AB 836, and we're going to receive a report from Denise Peralta-Gailey, and there are, I believe, some updates on this legislation as well.
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, the bill was updated yesterday, so my report reflects those changes. AB 836 by Assemblymember Wiggs would establish a statewide program that would identify ventilation spaces, which the bill refers to as clean air centers. Public centers like schools, community centers, senior centers, etc., that would be accessible to the public during wildfires or other smoke events. This would be done through an incentive program that provides funding for these facilities to improve their indoor air filtration systems. This bill aligns with the goals of our agency in protecting public health during wildfires, thus we recommend its support position. This concludes my report on AB 836. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So this started out as a bill that was just going to target the Bay Area, and now it's been expanded to be statewide. And so just so the committee is aware of that. The recommendation from our staff is to support. Would committee members like to comment on this? Not seeing any comments. Perhaps staff would like to comment on the kind of work we've already been doing in this regard and how we might accommodate this requirements of this legislation.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So with regards to these clean centers, we through the IQ Air program have instituted a number of clean air filtration systems for schools. And the intent, as I understand, for the legislation as originally drafted was that as a result of the wildfires and a result of the transport of the smoke, there were a number of schools and areas that were heavily impacted. And we sort of see having the ability to install the filtration systems, whether it be at schools, whether it be at senior centers, as something consistent with what we've been trying to do. And that's why we're in support, proposing support for this bill for your consideration.
Okay, any comments? Dr. Burke, did you have a comment? No? You raised your hand. I thought maybe you wanted to comment.
No, actually, I was worried about my hair looking bad.
Well, we got our priorities straight, don't we? Anyway, well, I was in Sacramento when the Paradise Fire, the campfire was going, and Sacramento was so badly impacted by the smoke at that time. And I'm sure some of our communities here in Southern California have experienced that too when we have had really severe fires. We expect the wildfire season to be worse than in years past, and that we will experience that again. So there is good reason to think about these clean air centers especially for vulnerable populations. So anyway, I will entertain a motion on this item.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Okay, Supervisor Perez moved.
Second.
A second from Dr. Parker. Thank you. And maybe have a roll call vote, please.
Dr. Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino?
Yes.
Supervisor Perez,
Aye.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Aye.
Dr. Parker,
Yes.
Mayor Mitchell.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
The next item is AB 1500 regarding hazardous substances. Again, a report from Denise Peralta-Gately.
Great. AB 1500, it's a bill by Assemblywoman Wendy Carrillo. It would expand the authority of a Certified Unified Program Agency, or CUPA, and local health officer to temporarily suspend the permit, including the shutdown of a facility, if conditions at the facility pose an imminent or substantial endangerment to public health and safety. Impacts to our agency: under AB 1132, we currently have the authority to take immediate action on air quality issues when an imminent and substantial danger to the public has been identified. Staff recommends the addition of amendments that ensure that AB 1500 does not conflict with this existing authority. Our recommended position is support with amendments. That concludes my report.
Okay, any questions about this bill and the recommendation of our staff on it? Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a motion on this bill. Anybody?
I'll move it.
Okay, the motion.
Dr.
is
Parker, second.
Dr. Berg moves and Dr. Parker seconds to support the bill with seeking amendments. Okay. Thank you. And next item is,
Roll call.
oh, sorry, roll call. Just moving on.
Dr. Burke,
Aye.
Councilmember Buscaino,
I vote.
Supervisor Perez,
Aye.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Aye.
Dr. Parker,
Aye.
and Mayor Mitchell.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Okay, and next we have SB 44 by Senator Skinner. And so Philip's going to give our report on that. Philip, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. SB 44 would require that CARB develop a comprehensive strategy for the deployment of medium and heavy-duty vehicles in the state in order to bring the state into compliance with federal air quality standards and reduce motor vehicle greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030 and by 80% by 2050. Now, amendments that just came in this morning made a change to the bill, so it is different from what's in the analysis in the packet. It no longer would provide that 10% of the annual proceeds of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund be appropriated in each budget through 2024-25 to CARB for the California Clean Truck, Bus, and Off-Road Vehicle Program to support commercialization and deployment of medium and heavy-duty vehicles that reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Rather, now the bill just calls for a funding upon appropriation by the legislature from GGRF and other sources for that same purpose. So they just pulled back in terms of the actual number requirement of how much money would be allocated. This bill still remains aligned with SCAQMD's priorities regarding reducing criteria pollutant and toxic emissions and facilitating attainment of federal air quality standards in the South Coast, and is consistent with our policies regarding reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the South Coast and the state. So staff is recommending a support position on the bill. There are a few suggestions we would like to provide to the author just for clarification. One is it makes a reference in the bill just to folks to collaborate with, including districts. We want to make sure it says local air districts. Also, we wanted to recommend seeking a 20% allocation of GGRF funds rather than the originally proposed 10, which has now been amended out of the bill. And also, finally, just directing, there's a last line of the bill that clarifies, that basically states that it would be focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in terms of deployment and commercialization of medium and heavy-duty vehicles. We wanted to have the author add in reducing criteria pollutant and toxic emissions as well.
Great, okay. Any questions on this bill? This is moving in the right direction for the South Coast. Dr. Burke, do you have a comment? Anybody? Okay.
You know, when changes like this come in at the last minute, you know, to be quite frank, I wasn't clear on everything that was described. Maybe a good bill may not be, but I won't. I'm going to abstain from voting on this bill.
Okay. Well, the legislative process is unpredictable. We can't know what they're gonna do up there in Sacramento when they
But
send the bill and
absolutely,
changes and so.
I understand. It's not our fault.
Yeah, no,
It's my fault.
it's not our fault, but
I have a question.
yes, go ahead.
So where's the funding coming from again? So I didn't understand.
Sure. So now as amended, it's going to be just subject to appropriation by the legislature and includes from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund or other sources. So they left it open to where it could come from.
But did it concurrently reduce the requirements of the elimination itself of particular matters by a certain date?
Yeah, I mean, the focus of the bill stays the same in terms of meeting the federal air quality goals, standards, and also by meeting the goals for greenhouse gases. So though that purpose stays the same, they just had their first version of the bill had no allocation, then they went to 10, then they went back to kind of just upon appropriation of the legislature. So it's more of a funding issue that is common in the legislature as they go through the process.
So you're recommending approval with your recommendations for amendments?
Yes, the goal is to have a clean support position, but also to have some of these few items addressed by the author as suggestions.
That's what I'm saying. So what you're saying is that we should approve it with your recommendations for change. Is that correct?
Yes, support and suggested changes that even if these may or may not be made, the 20% is a goal that we'd like to have seen, but if it didn't make it, still supporting the bill.
So Dr. Parker, if I could just add to the discussion here a bit, Madam Chair, would that be okay? So we know that the biggest challenge that we have is in the mobile source sector. And from this perspective, looking at the ability to commercialize and deploy trucks, both through the California Clean Truck Program, bus off-road vehicles, and the equipment technology program, these are all consistent. These are the kind of investments that we need in order to reach attainment. The challenge is the GGRF, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, is tapped for a lot of different purposes, including AB 617, both on the incentive side as well as other programs. And so right now everybody's fighting over the GGRF funds. This recent amendment takes away the designated allocation of 10% and left it more at the discretion, and I think that's to provide the legislature with some flexibility. But what we would like to see is not only in addition to the greenhouse gas reductions there, but there be a recognition that there has to be a maximization of the co-benefits so that we're getting the NOx and criteria pollutant benefits as well. So this supports exactly what we said we need to do within the AQMP, and that's why we're recommending support, and it's why we're recommending the clarification on the aspects.
But doesn't also the change allow for no funding?
Yes, that's why we put back in 20%.
So you're putting back in 20% of our recommendation?
Well, they had 10% originally, and we're saying that it should be more.
Yeah, my question is, we're actually saying, yes, we support, but with the 20%.
Yes.
Okay.
So if that's the case, if I may, Madam Chair, maybe perhaps support with amendments is what we should state, or oppose the less amended if we're trying to shoot for the 20%.
All right, I'll let staff address that because it may be better to get something, even though it's not the full amount you want, better rather than get nothing. I think that's one way to look at this. So, Philip, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say that our interest and the author's interest are aligned, and I think it's more of a battle of getting it properly funded. So maybe a support with amendments might be a more positive approach in terms of.
That's fine, but I think we just need to be clear.
Yes.
On what we want.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so we have a motion from Supervisor Perez, and is there a second?
Second?
Second.
From Supervisor Rutherford. And I have a couple of cards for public comment or one on this one from
Harvey Etter.
Oh, it's Harvey Etter. Okay, I couldn't read the writing, so Mr. Etter, I can not come forward in comments.
Hello, good morning. I'm Harvey Etter. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. I attended a meeting of the State Energy Commission and the PUC on building decarbonization on Monday at the La Kretz Innovation Center through UCLA and DWP, and stated there that everything that goes out that's going to have solar renewables has got to include the minimum 35% earmark that has been used in recent legislation, that there will be solar electric trucks. We said we talked a couple years with BYD, Tesla, etc. Besides looking at equity in production, that the solar trucks, these are Class 8 trucks, by setting up co-ops or corporations, partnerships, that any legislation that goes up for any energy-related stuff at all in the state, this is state policy, and it's not being implemented. And also, we've got stagnant, 30 years, no rise in income for the middle class. So basically, 2/3 of the population is out of the play. So it's imperative that all legislation here be done that way. Also, I mentioned this before, that for solar tax credits, it used to be 55 for the state, 40 for federal. I worked with some people, we did stack that and get 95 way back in the day. But the example that we did in the low incomes, the solar equity program was, there was a $3,000 refundable for low income in the state of California, and you do that for hot water, space heating, and electric. You have $9,000, and we said it could be leveraged with these programs to actually buy a place, a house or something. And this also needs to be dealt with, that the homeless situation and the housing problems, these are air quality problems as well, and need to be dealt with. I mentioned that there's two types of Section 8, one type that people aren't being told about it, that we can buy a place, and it's been on the books since 2001. And it's imperative that public advisors, and especially like comments made by the council chair, the city of LA, of how ashamed and startled they're concerned about 30, 40,000 people, 1% of the population of the city of LA homeless, etc. Anyway, all of this working, and also with the federal and state, the low income should be refundable, that can be used to leverage financing. We did a lot of different types of models. And anyway, any questions? No?
Thank you. Thank you, Harvey, for your comments. Any other public comments on this item? Seeing none, may we have a roll call?
Dr. Burke?
Dr. Burke?
You're on mute. You're mute.
We can't hear you.
Or maybe that's purposely.
I said Supervisor Perez talked me into it. I voted yes.
Councilmember Buscaino?
Yes.
Supervisor Perez?
Aye.
Supervisor Rutherford?
Aye.
Dr. Parker?
Aye.
Mayor Mitchell?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. We'll move on to Senate Bill 633, author Henry Stern, report again from Philip Crabb. Yes.
This bill would require the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment on or before July 1st, 2020, in coordination with entities including the South Coast, develop and implement a monitoring program to collect data on contaminants from the Santa Susana Field Laboratory that could migrate to and pollute surrounding areas. Although the Santa Susana Field Laboratory is located primarily within Ventura County, it is near the border and may be downwind of Los Angeles County. Staff believes that there may be potential groundwater contamination issues involved, but that there also is a small possibility of air impacts with respect to the West San Fernando and Santa Clarita Valley area. Given the potential impact on the South Coast region, a technical consultation role by AQMD would be appropriate. This bill is in line with AQMD's mission to protect public health and air quality as it impacts communities within the South Coast. Therefore, staff recommends a support position on this bill.
Any questions? I heard someone make.
I heard a statement. You said it's downwind of Los Angeles County?
Upwind.
Depends on the wind.
Towards
Okay.
I apologize if I was unclear.
Both, probably.
We could
Yeah,
have,
probably.
Yes.
both.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Upwind, I apologize.
Okay.
Any questions from committee members? Did I hear someone make a motion? No.
I'll make the motion, Madam Chair, and I also just want to state that I think it's appreciative that we're consulted, and I see that in the language. I think that's important because there is a downwind factor here, and so I'll move the bill.
Second.
Second from Dr. Parker, motion from Supervisor Perez. Is there any public comment on this? I don't have any cards, but anybody interested? Okay. Roll call, please.
Dr. Burke. Is Dr. Burke still there?
Yes, he's here.
Yes. Voted yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Buscaino?
Aye.
Supervisor Perez?
Aye.
Supervisor Rutherford?
Aye.
Dr. Parker?
Aye.
Mayor Mitchell?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Moving on to a Senate, this is
U.S. Senate.
Federal Senate, 747, offered by Carper, and a report from Lisa Tanaka O'Malley.
Good morning, Madam Chairman,
Morning.
members of the committee. This bipartisan bill would reauthorize the Diesel Emissions Reductions Act program for 5 years until 2024 at a level of $100 million per year. The program funds the voluntary replacement or installation of retrofits for existing heavy-duty diesel vehicles and engines. The bill also provides states a little bit more flexibility in recognizing that different types of vehicles are used throughout the nation. And lastly, as some states are unable to use their allocation because they can't make the local match, it reallocates those funds to the national grant program, which is competitive and which South Coast AQMD does very well. DERA has been very successful. For every dollar from the DERA program, it's matched by $3 in local and business and nonprofits. It yields about $13 in health benefits for every dollar invested. South Coast AQMD received approximately $4 million through fiscal years 2016 through 18, and the application process just closed for 2019. The bill is broadly supported, and we recommend a support position.
Thank you. Any questions on the DERA authorization?
Is there any room in that bill, Mr. Nastri, for the funds that are not claimed by the other agencies to be redistributed to those agencies that have the greater needs?
Well, the administrator would have the discretion to do that.
I understand, but I'm wondering if, since they're going with the new legislation, we should say that it should be on the basis itself of who has a greater need in order to redistribute. I'm just wondering if, would that not be a reasonable, since we have a greater need than most other agencies, is to say that we would then be up in line for next up? Because I assume we have a greater need than the amount of monies that are allocated to us. Is that correct?
Yeah, the challenge with DERA, Dr. Parker, is that the program in general is oversubscribed across all the regions. And so because of that oversubscription, there hasn't been sort of the redirection that you're talking about. And in order for JERA to have passed originally, it needed that broad national support. So my concern would be that if there were available funds, I think then they could redirect it. That's why I said it's at the administrator's discretion.
I understand.
Any
Okay,
other
thank you.
comments or questions on this one? All right, I will entertain a motion.
I'll move the item.
Thank you. Who made that motion?
Second?
Dr. Parker makes the motion and Supervisor Rutherford seconds the motion. And is there any public comment on? Well, I don't have a card. No, I have a card on public comment.
Okay, number 6.
Number general public comment, which is public comment.
Yeah. This is not number 6, Harvey. This
is not
yeah,
number 6.
We'll call you on number 6.
Okay, thank you. And may we have a roll call, please?
Dr. Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino?
Aye.
Supervisor Perez?
Aye.
Supervisor Rutherford?
Aye.
Dr. Parker?
Aye.
Mayor Mitchell?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to other business. Is there any other business to come before the committee? Do any committee members want to bring anything forward? Seeing none, we'll move to public comment. And Mr. Eddard, you may make the public comment at this time.
Hello, my name's Harvey Etter. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition and for the over 90% of the citizens that want to see an equitable, just solar transition ASAP. The big picture, we're in the middle of the 6th great extinction in the history of the planet caused by carbon and methane. This district continues to use natural gas like these trucks to meet air quality goals. This is madness, doing the same thing over and over with different results. We've got a federal debt now of $22 trillion and rising. It's like number 1 in the budget. If interest goes up, we've had it. Social Security, supposed to be gone, has to be reorganized in like 12, 14 years. Healthcare, the federal government, we don't know this thing about the Attorney General Barr. It reminds me, I was in DC in '74 working with environmental groups. And we had the Saturday Night Massacre, and included in that was William Ruckelshaus was Attorney General there. They stepped down. This guy wants to investigate the Democrats and the whole process. They're talking that this is going to be the greatest, this guy Bannon on CNN, greatest tension since before the Civil War in the United States. They're talking stuff. They're talking about traitors and all. We've got to set up our own infrastructure here and care for our least fortunate and have it equitable for the whole state. And we have our own, vis-a-vis De Leon and 6 or 8 other states, we have their own for retirement that's passed in California, that these funds should be networked into these co-ops, vertically and horizontally integrated and owned by the low and middle income equity. The more equal you are in our country, equity, the more equity you have, the more equal you are, unfortunately. Anyway, as I said before, everything that goes up from state, local, in this state and in this district should require the low-income solar equity program and the systems that we presented in 81 to the PUC. You know, I said again, this book I'm incorporating in the record, The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming by David Wallace Wells, out earlier this year, that we over the last 30 years, we put 50% of the fossil fuel emissions into the air compared to all other human history. We've done nothing over these years, except for the last 5 or 10 years. And this has to be dealt with now. This is not going away. anyway, and we've had frustrations getting information from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Etter. And is there any other public comment? Thank you.
No one in Los Angeles. No one's in Los Angeles, Madam Chair.
All right. Any remote site? Anyone have anybody?
No one here?
No.
No one here, Madam Chair.
All right. The next meeting will actually be June 14 because we're canceling the May 10 meeting. That's the same week that we are in the desert for the retreat. And we felt it would be best not to have the meeting then, but we'll have it, we'll adjourn until June 14. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.